wireless connection. Okay.
There we go.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out on this kind of rainy day. Well, not too bad, though, kind of a light rain. Reminds me of some of your other books.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Made into movies.
Yeah.
But, so we're really excited to be here. East End Books, Ptown, at the Ptown Library. Our summer series here this summer, and reminding people that this summer events are all across town. So look on our event page to see where it is. It could be at the library. Most things are here, but it could be at 20 Summers, Fine Arts Work Center, WOMR, Schoolhouse Gallery. So just take a look on there. And if you're in town, every week, every Thursday, when Provincetown Magazine comes out, we have an ad in there, and it also lists where the event is. So we look forward to seeing you. Upcoming events, we've got the whole list on our website and in the magazine, but we always get asked, you need to get your act together on quicker, what's almost selling out. So the ones that are almost selling out are the Brad Gooch event with Ken Folk on July 26th. Brad's got the brilliant new book out about Keith Haring. And that's two different events going on. Our regular book event, normal pricing, $3 or $5, is at the Davis space at WMR on the second floor. It's the building that Schoolhouse Gallery is in. And then we're co-sponsoring a separate event with 20 Summers to support 20 Summers. Like a lot of nonprofits, they're struggling to raise some money. So there's a dinner honoring them at Schoolhouse Gallery downstairs. That's separate. So if you want to go to that, on my website event page, there's a link to 20 Summers for that, and all the money goes to them. But our event is happening like normal upstairs, just a regular event. So, okay, the other ones that are almost out on the 17th, which is next week, the Hebridean Baker event with his new book. Coming in from Scotland. It'll be its third year in a row, so there'll be the open bar, food inspired by the new Scottish cuisine, wee stories, contests, games, singing. You name it. So that'll be happening. That's almost sold out. And then August 8th, Doris Kearns Goodwin with Kevin Sessoms and Ken Folk is reaching capacity as well, almost gone. And then the other one that's rapidly, the tickets are going, is August 23rd at the Fine Arts Work Center. I'm having Michael Cunningham and Ben Shattuck. Ben's beautiful short story collection just came out, and a certain actress we all love will be in the audience because her book comes out in October, and we will be doing an event sometime in the fall with Ben Shattuck, Julia Glass, and Jenny Slate at our Boston Seaport store, which leads me to say, now that we're into summer, people have asked, yes, the people that live in the greater Boston area and come here, now you do have the option. There's a drop-down menu when you buy a book on our website and ask for store pickup to say where you want it, here or in Boston, and it'll be there at that store. Anyway, we're really excited. Again, we want to thank the Provincetown Library for opening up a lot of dates for us. It's very much appreciated. And it's very exciting to have both two people I like very much, Casey Sherman and Fermin Rojas, two writers and playwright filmmakers that are here. And Casey, I think the last thing that we had with Casey was a couple years ago when I did this literary tour for the Provincetown Film Festival, and Casey was gracious enough to come when we had the luncheon at the Norman Mailer House. Again, thanks to Tatiana von Furstenberg, we were able to go there, and that was quite an amazing event, and we enjoyed going with you and everybody through the house and everything. But so anyway, it's very wonderful to have both of these people here. So this book, it's just one brief quote from Kristen Dilley, who is co-host of Mind Over Murder podcast. She says, Chris says, a must-read for fans of true crime and Hollywood history. A Murder in Hollywood never disappoints. Casey Sherman definitely serves just the right mix of glamour, glitz, and grit to keep the reader turning pages. It's a stunner from start to finish, and she's absolutely correct. Fermin Rojas, friend, is a producer, filmmaker, and a playwright, composer, film stage director and actor, and the founder and director of DKR Films, and the co-founder, Jay Kubish, is right back there in the audience. We're glad that Jay is here as well. And Casey Sherman Boy, I tell you, I've got his full resume on our event website, but let me just say, of course, as everyone knows, he's a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Boston Globe best-selling author. 17 books, including The Finest Hours, which is a major Walt Disney Studio motion picture starring Chris Pine and Casey Affleck. Patriots Day, another acclaimed motion picture from CBS. Films starring Mark Wahlberg and Kevin Bacon. Casey's 2023 true crime bestseller Helltown is now in development as a limited television series for Amazon Studio, where he'll serve as an executive producer on the project, which is slated to star Oscar Isaac from Dune, and directed by Edward Berger, and produced by Team Downey, Robert Downey Jr. and Susan Downey. Sherman's other books include James Patterson's The Last Days of John Lennon, which spent more than 23 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. 12, The Inside Story of Tom Brady's Fight for Redemption, and Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. Casey's appeared on more than 100 television and radio programs, and is a contributing writer for Time Magazine, Esquire, The Washington Post, Daily Beast, Boston Magazine, and the Boston Herald. So I guess, I don't know when this man sleeps, or if he does at all. He's as prolific
a couple of hours a night. Yes, exactly.
But we're very excited to have these two individuals here, and the book is fantastic. And without further ado, I give you Casey and Fermin.
All right, well, thank you so much. I guess before we get started, I would like to thank you, Jeff. Artists and writers like Fermin and myself, we don't exist without, real strong support from independent booksellers that, not only, sell the books, but really promote literature and just get books in the hands of people, old and young, because you're never too old, you're never too young to really read your first book. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, like in the South, we say hug up together.
TV close, that's what we say. First off, Jeff, thank you so much for asking me to be in conversation with Casey. I'm a fan of your work, and Jeff made my job a lot easier because he gave all your credentials,
right.
so we can dive right into the good stuff.
There's a whole lot more.
So, full disclosure, we had a conversation the other day. We started, and I shared with you my great love of Hollywood classics. I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up in Miami, and Channel 6 would always rerun all these Hollywood classics over and over and over again. So, the first thing I think is curious, like, give us a little overview of the story, right? And then my follow-up to that, which we can go right into, is what drew you to this story in the first place?
Okay, and two great questions right off the bat here. I would say that the story in a nutshell, it's the biggest scandal in Hollywood history pre-OJ. Back in 1958, Lana Turner, who was, I always tell audiences, especially younger people today, I'm like, she's the Taylor Swift of the 1940s and early 1950s. And a shocking crime happened in her Beverly Hills mansion. Her gangster boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, wound up dead with a knife wound in his abdomen on her bedroom floor. And that crime was basically pinned on Lana's young daughter, Cheryl Crane. And it just created a firestorm of controversy and media interest. And going back to why I wanted to write it is because that's what, the public has told us, that's what the media has told us for 60 years. Lana Turner's been looked at as a femme fatale, not only in her films, but really by Hollywood history. And I remember just coming off of Helltown, my agent, Peter Steinberg, and I were having a conversation. What is going to be your next book? It's got to be what he said, Helltown big. So think something not necessarily parochial to New England, but something, on a national scale that you can write about. And he sent me probably 5 to 6 different articles about notorious or unsolved crimes. And one was the Lana Turner case. Now, I'm a sucker for LA crime noir, so Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, James Cain, James Elroy. I love that feeling and that environment of kind of early Hollywood, and certainly the Pulp Fiction aspect of what Hollywood and crime. at the time. So I told my agent, I said, look, give me 2 weeks. If I can find something new to tell in this story, I'm in. And it didn't take me 2 weeks. As my wife attests, it took me about, a day to really put the pieces together on a 30,000 foot view to say, wait a minute, history is not what we've learned over 60 years. There's something different here. There's a different story to tell. And I mentioned, in our conversation yesterday, Fermin, is that I wanted to, after learning all the information I learned, was to elevate Lana. She's not a femme fatale, she's a feminist icon. And I think the pages of Murder in Hollywood really speak to that.
Well, in that first 24 hours, what was that one thing, that kernel that you found that you're like, oh, there's something not right in this story? What was?
So, as an investigative journalist, the first thing you do is you try to get the crime scene photos. What did the crime scene look like? Johnny Stompanato was stabbed in the abdomen. That's a very bloody crime.
Yeah,
very bloody.
Blood was.
Yeah, blood was obviously squirting on the walls. You can imagine what it must have looked like. Doesn't look like that in the crime scene photos. Crime scene was cleaned up before police even got there. Johnny Stompanato looks like he was laid there by a Hollywood prop master on her bedroom floor. And that told me, okay, maybe this wasn't, didn't happen the way that law enforcement or the media, told us it happened. And then I go all the way back to really piece together not only Lana's story, but the ascension of organized crime in LA, which was very disorganized in the early days of Hollywood.
I mean, I don't think I'm giving anything away. Like the book opens with the actual event happening, sure, and that she makes a phone call to the lawyer, to
Jerry Giesler.
Jerry Giesler. Did you know that? Was this common knowledge going in, or how did you find out that this phone call had been made to Giesler?
Because that was in the primary source document, so that was in a lot of the crime scene reports. And it's interesting you mentioned, there's a dead guy on Lana's bedroom floor. Who she call first? She doesn't call police. She calls her lawyer. And Jerry Giesler was the Johnny Cochran of the 1950s, or I should say Johnny Cochran was the Jerry Giesler of the 1990s. So when Errol Flynn got in trouble, the battle cry was "Get me Giesler." When Robert Mitchum got arrested for smoking pot, the battle cry was "Get me Giesler." So when Lana had a dead man on her bedroom floor, the battle cry was "Get me Giesler." So Jerry shows up before anybody else. I would say, close to 2 hours before authorities arrived. And he, in my opinion, created the narrative that we're all talking about today. Well, the real story is much different.
I think the book's a profound read in the sense of her being labeled, as a femme fatale.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was resonated for me a lot is the abuse that women seemed to, the institutional abuse that was perpetrated on women within the Hollywood studio system. For example, the book is juicy, people. You got to, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of mob, there's the Macambo, or you name it, Fernando. Things that there's an actor who was my favorite Tarzan when I was a kid, Lex Barker.
Oh yeah.
As problematic as the Tarzan movies have aged, but I'm gay. I thought he was the hottest thing. It's like, this book ruined it for me. Sorry, terrible guy.
Yeah.
But I think I told you very honestly, as I was reading it, and I'm reading about. Lana had all these boyfriends, and she apparently had a good sexual appetite, and I had to check my own bias, as having grown up, I'm 64 years old, so our reaction was, oh, women are not supposed to behave that, right?
Sure.
I had to check my own bias. My initial reaction was exactly that. I was like, oh, she was just like her characters in her movie, until you caught myself and realized, it was okay if the guys did it because they were the man about town, the stud, whatever.
Right.
So
So I mean, what I would say is, and thank you. Yeah, the book does have a lot. So it's got every, classic Hollywood actor and actress that you've ever heard of. They're in the book. It also talks a lot about the mob, and I know the mob. I've written about the mob. I wrote about Whitey Bulger. I knew Whitey Bulger. I know that world. However, I was more disgusted and horrified when I really racked focus onto the studio system and realized early on that Lana and her fellow young actors, her young actors like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, they were all abused physically, emotionally at 15 years old. Lana Turner was discovered in the 1930s, and it's the greatest discovery story in Hollywood history, where she was at a soda fountain right across the street from Hollywood High School. And that story made the press, and every young woman across America, put together what money they could, got a bus, got a train, got a plane. They tried to go out to Hollywood and sit on that stool, hoping to be discovered. And you look at it from a 30,000-foot lens and you think, oh, that's a kind of a beautiful story. But when I dug under the hood, I realized how seedy and disgusting that story actually is, because the person who discovered Lana was Billy Wilkerson. Billy Wilkerson was the founder of the Hollywood Reporter. And he used to leave his office at noon every day and go to this malt shop, not Schwab's like everybody thinks it is. It's a different malt shop. In reality, it was literally right across from Hollywood High School. And he'd go there just to ogle underaged girls. And here comes Lana at 15 years old. She's got no sight in terms of being in Hollywood. She wanted to be a fashion designer. She wasn't very good at school, so she'd skip class and go get a soda, which is what she did that day. And Billy Wilkerson realizes she's, very mature physically for her age at 15, and says, you should be in movies. And she takes his card, goes home, shows her mother, and they have a meeting with not only Billy, but another talent scout a couple days later. And the talent scout, Zeppo Marx, by the way, who became a very big talent scout in Hollywood. He was the one that ran Lana's early career. And he asked her, how old are you? 15. Never, ever tell anybody in this town you're 15 again. From now on, you're 18. So, here is Lana at 15 years old, already being sexualized and losing her innocence, physically and emotionally. And to your point, Furman, in terms of the double standard at the time, you had all of these major Hollywood male stars going around town and dating whomever they wanted. The studio MGM put 15-year-old Lana on the arm of every leading man they had, including Ronald Reagan, who was 28, 29 years old, who had seduced an underaged Lana Turner. If that happened now, criminal charges would have been brought against the future president of the United States. Didn't happen at that time. Whereas Lana, who was married several times, as we know, she had a morality clause in a contract where she couldn't just date somebody. If she fell in love with somebody, she had to marry that person. Hence the 7 marriages. And she always looked for love in her life, and really never found it, which is very, very sad.
Yeah, it was that, growing up, it's like, oh, everybody would be scandalized. Oh, Zsa Gabor, she's been married to 7 men, or however. They had no choice.
They had no choice.
They had no choice. It was either get married or not date or lose a career.
Yeah. And not only that is, the morality clause was really weird for Lana, because Louis B. Mayer was the head of MGM at the time, really twisted guy. He used to sit Judy Garland on his lap and kind of fondle her at 13, 14 years old and get her to sing for him. This is the creepy guy that we're talking about here. And he had a very close relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, who was just starting with the FBI, creating the FBI. And FBI agents used to follow Lana Turner around New York. Lana was dating an African-American jazz musician at the time. That was a big no-no, especially for her morality contract. So as she is getting kicked out of every hotel, bar, and restaurant because she is dating, somebody outside her race, there is an FBI agent typing up a report and sending that to Louis B. Mayer. And Lana almost lost her job and her livelihood, 19, 20 years old, just for doing that.
I want to turn our attention for a moment, because we're talking about Lana, but can we talk about Cheryl for a moment, the daughter? So the murder gets pinned, if you will, or attributed to Cheryl, who is 14 at the time. And what can you give us a little summary of what happened after that, and how was Cheryl's life affected? What happened, Yeah,
Cheryl is a very tragic figure in this story. Growing up, the daughter of Lana Turner. Lana wasn't a great parent, to her own admission. Cheryl really had to parent her mother in many ways, but Lana really didn't have a childhood either. She was 15 and she had to take care of her mother. And she had to, work 70-hour work weeks and the studios were feeding Lana and Judy Garland amphetamines just to keep cranking out these, family-friendly films. Somehow Lana survives that, but Lana had a string of disastrous relationships, and that was because, I opened with a crime, but then I segue into a very tragic moment in Lana's life, her father's murder, unsolved murder in San Francisco when she was just a child. Her father promised Lana that she would go out and get Lana a bicycle for her birthday. He had no money, so we got into a card game, and he won, but he never made it out alive. They stole the money, they killed him, and Lana and her mother were left without a male figure in their lives. So Lana was always grasping to find that mysterious male figure who would take care of her, and she never did. And then I think that trickled down to her daughter Cheryl as well. And I would say that going back to the murder, which is kind of the white elephant in the room here. When I started to look at this, I realized, okay, what was the motivation behind the murder? Cheryl at 14 stabbed allegedly a combat veteran in Johnny Stompanato, somebody that had killed Japanese soldiers and enemy with his bare hands.
It was like
during World War II.
6'4".
Yeah, he was a mob enforcer and a killer and a tough, rugged guy, which is why his boss Mickey Cohen hired him. Now you realize, one of the things I always thought, well, how did they meet? They didn't meet at a library. They didn't meet at a coffee house, not Johnny Stompanato and Lana Turner. This was a plot from day one to extort and blackmail Lana Turner. Mickey Cohen, who was the godfather of LA at the time, and you'll read a lot about Mickey as he's ascending into Hollywood just at the same time almost as Lana is. And there are a lot of gangland shootouts right on the Sunset Strip, right in Brentwood. I mean, I did a lot of gumshoeing in LA just to walk the grid in terms of where all this happened. And it was amazing that as the Hollywood studios are shooting gangster movies 2 blocks away, gangsters are shooting at each other in broad daylight out in Hollywood. And Mickey survives, several attempts at his life. He goes to prison for tax evasion like his hero Al Capone did. And when he emerges, he doesn't want to live by the sword and gun anymore, but he's still a criminal. So how can he extort and extract money from people who have it? He creates a plot where he uses Johnny Stompanato, his muscle and his enforcer, as bait to lure men and women into compromising positions, film them in those compromising positions, and then blackmail them. And that's how the relationship with Lana started. There was a blackmail scheme at the beginning.
Either convince them or they would drug them.
Yeah. So Lana was actually drugged by Johnny and put into bed with a female, and she didn't know about this for a while. And then when she was knee deep in the relationship, she couldn't get out because Johnny was so vicious. And we talk about just the abuse, the physical abuse that Lana survived, and that's why I thought, okay, here's how the knife is taken out of Cheryl's hands and put into Lana's hands. And what she does with it isn't an act of spite or just a murderous effort. It was really something that she had to do to save her life and to save her child's life.
Right. He also threatened the life of the child and the mother.
Correct.
And I think that was like a bridge too far.
Yeah. Johnny Stompanato was abusive toward Lana. But what I love about Lana is that Lana understood this. She is withstanding, vicious beatings. And it was at a time where the studio fired her. So Lana was let go from MGM around 1957 because she was aging out at 37. Marilyn
Monroe was in the wings.
Marilyn was in the wings, and I read about Marilyn and Lana because Lana really tutored Marilyn. Whereas when Lana was coming up and Joan Crawford was sitting on the Hollywood throne, Joan would have slit Lana's throat to keep that kind of power. Lana didn't feel the same way about Marilyn. Lana really took Marilyn under her wing a little bit, and then Lana did something that was really unique in the 50s. She created her own production company. Now, no one else was doing that besides Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball.
Yeah.
But because Lucy had Desi, it made sense. Here's Lana, who doesn't really have a studio backing anymore. She decides to create a production company, and she does. And her first film is Another Time, Another Place, which was filmed in Hollywood, not Hollywood, London, thank you. And she chose London where the story happened. She could have filmed it in Hollywood. She chose London because it was conveniently a way to get away from Johnny Stompanato. Johnny didn't have a passport, so Lana knew that Johnny couldn't travel. So Lana goes to England and hires a very unknown Scottish actor who you can imagine who he was.
Wait. Okay, so he's getting to one of my favorite scenes in the book, and I would love for you to read
Sure.
just that scene. It's Sean Connery, and this scene is so great because he really was James Bond.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I don't know. Let's see where we are here.
It's like the last third there.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. I'm just gonna get
Couple
to
of pages,
Yeah. I think where are we talking about here?
Here.
Sorry, guys. This is.
The question
Should have been
I should have marked
flagged.
it. Sorry. Before.
But as we're looking for that particular passage, and a lot of times I won't read my own stuff. You can read it. I narrate these books on Audible, and it's the worst possible job to have. It's 30 hours in a cramped recording booth, and I don't even want to hear my own voice at that point. But what Vermin's referring to, go ahead.
Well, no, I'll just narrate. So we can't find. So we'll just move on. So she's on the set, and she wanted to shoot in Hollywood, in London also, because the film, she wanted to film on location, which was also like kind of, it was expensive
Sure.
and complicated to do that back then. So she was starring in it with Sean Connery, and she's on the set with Sean, and they had just finished the kissing scene. Well, unbeknownst to her, because she was writing letters to Johnny and saying, "Oh, I love you," and this and that, just to put him off. I mean, she really had to play a role in her own life.
Right.
And so finally, Johnny wants to come to London. He ends up coming to London, but her condition is he cannot be on set. He is barred from the set. And his whole thing is he wanted to be legitimized. He wanted to muscle in, literally, on her film business and career. So he shows up there's rumors that she and Sean Connery have a thing going on. So he shows up on the set with a gun in his pocket. I just can imagine what security,
I mean, clearly no security,
right?
at the time.
And they just finished the kissing scene. He walks up to Sean Connery, puts a gun in his chest, and says, "I'm going to kill you." And Sean Connery knocks the gun out of his hand, grabs his arm, puts him in like a half Nelson, knocks him to the ground, and says, "If you ever touch her again, I'll kill you."
You can do that accent much better than I can.
I butchered it. But I'm like, oh my God, I love that scene. It's like Sean Connery really is James Bond,
And he was an unknown actor at the time. And,
actor.
you mentioned Stompanato, who wanted to legitimize himself. So Stompanato's, early motive was to blackmail Lana. And then Stompanato says, wait a minute, why can't I be a producer? If you ever recall the book and the film Get Shorty, John Travolta goes out to Hollywood and takes over town. That's what Stompanato tried to do and thought he could. He kept on sending Lana these, lousy screenplays and books to, option. And Lana's got to keep him at arm's length because he's a gangster. And Lana's got to get funding for her films. So she does what she can to appease him, but he's overzealous, and he shows up in England with a gun. Again, he had no passport, so he had to get a forged passport. He had to get a gun through security, not only in England, but also at the airport as well. And Sean Connery becomes James Bond in that moment. And Lana survives. It's another vicious beating that Johnny lays on Lana. And Lana, at the end of the film, wants to get away. She's just, finished the first movie as a producer that she's had. So she wants to celebrate with a vacation on her own in Acapulco. And lo and behold, who's there? Stalking her, Johnny Stompanato. And I think at that moment, Furman, we talk a little bit about the manipulation that Johnny had over her. And there are photographs of Johnny and Lana on vacation in Acapulco. At first, Johnny says, I'm a changed man, baby. I mean, who hasn't heard that, in the movies and otherwise. And she doesn't believe it, but she knows that if she locks him out of her hotel room, he's going to kick it down and beat her. And he does. So finally, she just gives herself body and soul to Stompanato just to survive that vacation. And during that vacation, she gets a call from her agent who says, Lana, you've just been nominated for an Academy Award for Peyton Place. The first Academy Award nomination she's ever had. And it legitimizes her in the Hollywood community because nobody ever thought of Lana Turner as a great actress. But now she is being nominated really by her peers. So she's got to cut her vacation short. They end up at the Burbank airport, and there's this iconic photo of Johnny, Cheryl Crane at 14, and Lana. And the paparazzi's there is because Johnny called them all. And Johnny wanted to, get every photo he could next to Lana Turner so everybody in Hollywood would know that he was a power player. But Lana's whispering to these reporters, I'm not with him. Now we're just friends. Johnny doesn't know this. Johnny reads about it. And Johnny, you can imagine, blows his stack. And Johnny says, well, you're going to take me to the Oscars. Lana says, no way, because you're a gangster. Or, people still think you're a gangster. I'm going to take my mother and Cheryl. And she does. And it's the most beautiful night in Lana's professional life. She doesn't win, but she doesn't have to. She gets to dance with Cary Grant. She gets to, schmooze with Sean Connery and all the great actors that are just at her feet, telling her how great she is.
Jimmy Stewart.
She's on the stage with Jimmy Stewart. Cheryl is having the time of her life, and it's like a Cinderella story. After the Oscars, they go back to Lana's bungalow in Beverly Hills. Lana puts Cheryl to bed. She goes into her bedroom to take off her shoes, and who's there in the darkness? Johnny. Johnny's angry. And Johnny, over the next several hours, beats Lana within an inch of her life. Cheryl can hear it in the other room. Cheryl's wondering, do I call police? But if I call police, will Johnny just kill us before the police get there? So in the next day, Lana is adept at covering all of her bruises. But before Johnny leaves, to your point, Furman, Johnny threatens to kill Lana again. He's done that countless times. But he makes a fatal mistake for Johnny. He goes, not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to kill your mother, and I'm going to kill your kid. And I think that's where the light flipped in Lana's head. One of us is going to live and one of us is going to die here. And the mama bear clause came out and she said, I got to take this guy out before he kills my daughter. And that's what I think she did.
It's ironic that she's left with the option that's usually the only resolution for a mob situation.
Yeah,
exactly. Not the opponent, right? And which, by the way, to backtrack to the Acapulco incident, Johnny staged the whole publicity stunt. He called the reporters because he wanted to be the celebrity. It's interesting, the power dynamic that ensued there, because he's a thug. The only power that he can exert over her is physical and intimidation, but she wielded the real power in the relationship. And I can only imagine how that exacerbated his hatred for her, or his need to dominate.
It emasculated him. Certainly she was the dominant player in the relationship, and the only way to, get at an even level with her, at least in his mind, was to, beat her physically and abuse her sexually, which he did a lot. And, she makes a decision. This is 1958. The Oscar night beating has just happened. Lana is now going to be moving into her rented mansion at 730 North Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills. And, the house is still there. There's a photograph of it in the book. And I went there just to look at it and just to imagine what it was like on Good Friday, 1958, when that killing did happen. And I was really taken aback by Lana moves in to that place, and the first thing she buys is a knife. Now, Lana, for all of her amazing attributes, she was a lousy cook. She didn't know where a kitchen was. People cooked for her. So, she wanted to get cutlery, not to slice lemons. She knew that would be the weapon she would need when Johnny got physical again, because Johnny always got physical. So Good Friday, 1958, an argument ensues. A knife is pulled out. Johnny is stabbed in his abdomen. Incredibly bloody mess. Johnny goes down. Enter Jerry Giesler, who shows up, and you can imagine Jerry's thinking, okay, how do I clean this crime scene up and protect Lana? Because he knew that if Lana was arrested for murder, there was premeditation because of all the beatings. and all the threats. So that would be a murder one charge. And Lana Turner would possibly be thrown in the electric chair at the time because that still existed in 1958. And people always ask me from, and why didn't just Lana just go to the police? Because there weren't any restraining orders in 1957, 1958. I mean, they don't even work today. You know, domestic abuse was something that wasn't talked about in polite society, in polite conversation. So Lana was put into a corner, and she had to fight back. And what struck me about, you know, the investigation, and I think kind of how sloppy it was, and you and I discussed this yesterday, this wasn't an LAPD investigation. Those homicide detectives, they knew where to look. This was a Beverly Hills cop situation. You know, Eddie Murphy Beverly Hills cop. They didn't have a lot of homicide experience, and they get there, and Lana's lawyer is creating the whole narrative. This is what happened. 14-year-old girl stabbed Johnny Stompanato. So why would Jerry Giesler put the knife in Cheryl's hands? Because Jerry claimed and believed, I can get justifiable homicide for a child. You know, the jury will be empathetic and sympathetic for a kid who was breaking up a fight, who thought her mother was going to get killed. And that's ultimately kind of what happens, but nobody believes it in Hollywood. Everybody believes that Lana killed Johnny, including Mickey Cohen. And now Mickey Cohen is out for revenge and wants to kill Lana Turner.
One of the things that I think, Casey, that you're so brilliant at is connecting all these different dots. And so there's really two parallel stories running through here, which I think are so fascinating. The Lana story, all the Hollywood stuff, but also you connect this incredible timeline of mob development between the East Coast, Chicago, and LA. Could you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah.
Was that woven in?
That was woven in. I mean, you know, I'm a mob guy, so I'm always fascinated to, you know, write about it. And the names were jumping out at me. Al Capone, Bugsy Siegel, obviously Mickey Cohen. And, you know, you had your New York Cities and your Chicagos and your Kansas Cities, all these mob fiefdoms. But you had a lot of money, you know, being generated in Hollywood, and no organized crime to take that money out of the hands of legitimate people. And that's why the mob sent Bugsy Siegel at first to LA to really organize, you know, a bunch of disparate gangs that were running around, you know, stealing from people and not kicking back to New York City and to Al Capone in Chicago. So Bugsy enters the scene, and he's got a young mentor, or a young protege, I should say, in Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen grew up in LA, so he knew the streets, he knew the town. And as Bugsy is trying to legitimize himself, he's also, you know, I get into the whole Flamingo Hotel part of this, and it's interesting that Virginia Hill, you know, Bugsy's mistress, who is in the film with Warren Beatty and Annette Bening, you know, she runs into Lana because she's dating Lana's husband. You know, so there, you know, it was, you know, what I found fascinating, guys, was that you could be at a Hollywood party, and on one side of the room is Bugsy Siegel, and on the other side of the room is Clark Gable. And no one better than that. Everybody, you know, hung out together. So, you know, there was a lot, you know, and I think they intermingled in a way which I thought, you know, was very fascinating.
I think it's one of the things I learned from the book. And the other thing I found that was really fun in reading the book is, I mean, there's a lot of photographs, and then you go back. I found myself stopping at chapters and going back and watching movie clips and watching newsreels, and I'm going to do it some more. I'm going to go back and reread it again. I mean, I had to finish reading it before we talked, but it's so much, you know, it's so fun to read a book where you can have so much actual source material or visual material and audio material of things that happen. But I want to turn my attention for a moment. You know, as a writer myself, I think one of the things that fascinates me the most with other artists who write is your process, or for any artist, process. What is process like for you? So your agent tells you, here's an idea, or you come up with the idea, and then do you do all your research? You spend 3 years researching, and then you write, or what's your process?
Yeah, I mean, now I write and publish about a book a year. So, you know, my background is journalism.
Slacker.
Yeah. But that, you know, my background as a journalist allows me to research and absorb information and then write it. And I call myself an archaeologist of words. I love the research part of this, finding new things out, especially going back, because you had all those visuals. Lana's filmography was very interesting, and the postman always rings twice. My wife Kristen and I, we screened that film at the Chatham Orpheum Theater several months ago when the book came out, and we talked a little bit about the book before the screening, and then we watched it on the big screen. And it's great because it really played like Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was really almost a comedy. People were laughing at the dun dun dun, and the film noir over the top, dramatization of the film. But it made it, it was such a beautiful movie. When you take all those factors into it, and and I'm watching Lana, and I knew I'd written about her, and I think in the back of my head, every book that I write from it has to have a heart, even if it's a true crime book. Who is the beating heart of this story? For Helltown, for me, it was Kurt Vonnegut. It wasn't the serial killer. And for Whitey Bulger, it wasn't Whitey Bulger. It was the gay female FBI agent named Noreen Gleason that took that bastard down. Because of Noreen Gleason, he was arrested and ultimately, he was killed in prison. But I always look for these, what is the reader going to follow? What story is the reader going to follow? And I think when you read A Murder in Hollywood, you're going to have a lot of sympathy for Lana. You're going to get angry with her too at times. I almost felt like a big brother, like, Lana, don't do this.
Right.
Don't don't be schmoozed by Johnny Stompanato. I'm telling you, he's bad news. And ultimately, she does. But I came out of it and with a greater appreciation for her, and a greater appreciation for all of these actors, in the early 30s, 40s, and 50s that took so much crap from the studio system, and some didn't survive. Fortunately for Lana, she did.
The other thing that I love too, Casey, is it's very easy to demonize somebody like a Mickey Cohen, and I mean they are monsters.
Sure.
Let's get that straight. But I think you're so insightful in giving us their backstories. I mean, they're tragic figures. In a way, you almost have to. There's a sense of a small degree of compassion. As a trained actor, I'm always told, if you're going to play, Jack the Ripper, you've got to find the Achilles heel or the emotion.
Where did it go wrong for Jack?
What's the way that somebody? People don't start out as monsters generally.
True.
And I think the book gives us an idea of. These people didn't necessarily start out as monsters. They were products of their society. Do you want to?
Yeah, no, I think especially with somebody like Mickey Cohen, he was the product of a single mother household, living a very hard scrabble life on the streets of LA as a little kid. And his mother was running a gin mill in the back of her supermarket. So he was kind of thrust into organized crime at an early age. And you look at somebody like Mickey, who was brilliant. You think, God, if he had just, worked for a bank or some other corporation, he would have been a Fortune 500 leader that would all be, applauding today. And quite frankly, there is a blur in terms of gangsters and some of these, corporate raiders that do much more damage to American society than a lot of these organized crime guys do, and they don't get any of the blame for it.
And Johnny as well.
Yeah, Johnny was Johnny had grew up in the Midwest. Very pleasant family. He was a middle class kid, and went to war. He went to military school because he got in a little trouble with the girls in his hometown. So they sent him to military school, and ultimately he found himself in Okinawa, and in some of these landing invasions where it was a kill or be killed situation for anybody. And the fact that Johnny survived is a miracle, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people said, wait a minute, a 14-year-old kid like Cheryl's going to get the drop on Johnny Stompanato, who was surrounded by the enemy in Japan and obviously on the streets of LA. It didn't make much sense to them. So you try to find that humanity, and again, Stompanato wanted to legitimize himself, but he was also very brutal, and he took advantage of people, not just women. He took advantage of men. Merv Griffin was somebody that Johnny had seduced, and Liberace. And again, these guys were men who couldn't love who they wanted to love in the 1950s, and Mickey Cohen and Stompanato took advantage of that. Janet Lee was another extortion target for Johnny and Mickey. Janet was tough though. Janet, she had already fended off Alfred Hitchcock, so she wasn't going to let Johnny Stompanato, or Mickey Cohen, get too close to her. So it's an interesting, play with all of these different characters for sure.
And before we went on camera, and we'll then open up for some questions. What made? I know it's kind of sophomoric,
Sure.
but I love to ask this question. How did you know you loved writing? What was that moment? That aha! Oh, I love doing this.
Well, I call myself the accidental author as well. I never believed that I'd be writing books one day, but that is until I was thrust into the spotlight because of my work in one case. One of the biggest cases in American crime, the case of the Boston Strangler. Now, for me, this wasn't just a curious assignment, it was personal. My aunt, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, was the youngest and final victim in that notorious 1960s murder spree. So I investigated that case as a young journalist, not to write a book about it, but to find some answers and possibly some closure for my mother, who was 17 when her 19-year-old sister was murdered on Charles Street in Beacon Hill in 1964. And a very well-known author, Sebastian Younger, approached me and said, I want to write your story. And of course, he's coming off of Perfect Storm, great writer. I felt very humbled and excited about working with somebody like that. But then I thought, wait, if I'm living this, if somebody's going to write it, it has to be me. And it's going to succeed or fail on those merits. And I wrote the book, never taking a writing class, but being an avid reader. That was my master class. And tying, my aunt's story and my story into, those techniques that I loved, from your Hemingways to your Mailers to your Halberstams to your Steinbecks. And after I wrote the book, it was a surprise bestseller. And I thought, I can do this. There are other stories that need to be told. And, I live to write. It's not a chore for me. When I'm not writing physically, and you know this as a writer yourself, you're always writing in your head. You're always writing that next act in your head, or rewriting that last chapter in my head.
Yeah, my partner was like, I'll zone out. He'll ask me something 3 times. He's like, "You're writing in your head, aren't you?" I'm like,
My wife does the same thing. We aren't who we are with incredibly loving and patient people in our lives, for sure.
One last question: how did this change you? Writing this, everything we create has an impact on us. What did Casey Sherman walk away with from this story?
Casey Sherman's got 2 daughters, and I can only imagine if that had happened to one of them. And again, I look at Lana a lot differently, and I'm so excited that I can introduce Lana to a new generation of people that'll say, wait a minute, she's not who, history told us she was. This woman took a stand to protect herself, to protect her family, and I think she paved the way for every actor and actress who now has their own production company, or has gone through the torture chamber, if you will, of Me Too. Mm-hmm. Lana was really the Me Too pioneer, and somebody that I think you can make that direct connection from what she went through to what actors and actresses are still going through to a degree today.
Awesome. So I want to open up for questions from our beautiful audience. Yes, right.
Okay.
So what happened to Cheryl?
Great question. So Cheryl, when you read the book, I don't take Lana's story and bring it all the way up to her death. I wanted to find a moment, and we talked about this, I call it stick the landing, it's a gymnast term. I wanted to find a moment that made sense where Cheryl and Lana are celebrated again after just being crucified by the press and by law enforcement. And I found it about a year after this all went down. But Cheryl, as you can imagine, and Lana, they had a tumultuous relationship going all the way forward and through Lana's life. One of the reasons why I think Cheryl maintained responsibility for Johnny Stampanato's murder, or death, I think you call it murder, is because that there is no statute of limitation on murder, that Lana could have always been brought up on capital murder charges. So I think she was trying to protect Mom. She wrote a beautiful, heart-wrenching book of her own called Detour, talking about growing up the daughter of Lana Turner. And then she leaned into her kind of infamy a little bit and wrote a dime store novel called The Killer Always Rings Twice. And I love that. I want, if somebody needs to have some fun,
Oh my
let it
God.
be Cheryl, right?
Oh my God.
So, I did try to approach Cheryl at the beginning of this journey, and I had heard that she wasn't in great health. And I never, was able to make contact with her. But I can only imagine what she would have thought. Oh God, here's another person who's going to drag my mother's legacy through the mud. I hope now that the book has been out, that somebody has either shown her the book, or she's read it herself, or she's listened to it. And I hope that she says, wow, here's somebody that, took care of my mother, given all the information that he found and put in the book.
Cheryl's she's in her 80s now, right?
Yeah. Cheryl is certainly somebody that is, she was 14 in 1958, so do the math. I'm not very good at math, which is why I'm a writer. But yeah, she, and again, I think that the legacy of Lana is changing and shifting with this book now. We're talking about a feature film. Terrence Winter, who created Boardwalk Empire for HBO, wrote Wolf of Wall Street. He's my feature film partner on this project. And we're also planning a feature documentary on this book as well. And the director and my partner in that is Laurent Bazaru, whose film Faye Dunaway is now premiering on HBO. So you want to talk about surrounding yourself with brilliant talent and getting a story like Lana's made. I'm very happy that they leaned into it and saw Lana like I did.
That's amazing. We had other hands? Yes.
Yeah.
Was Cheryl charged?
Cheryl, well, that's a great question. So she goes through the ringer, and when you read the book, you'll see that it was a roll of the dice that Jerry Giesler forced, I think, Lana and Cheryl to make. And Cheryl almost, they almost didn't make it out. Cheryl was almost sent to, reform school or jail, if you will, for, the remainder of her teenage years. But fortunately, it did end up in favor of Cheryl and in favor of Lana. And one of the things, too, when you read about it that struck me as odd was that I mentioned that Mickey Cohen never believed it was Cheryl that killed Johnny. So Mickey Cohen got Johnny's family to file a wrongful death suit against Lana Turner. And that went into deposition in late 1958. So a new lawyer is representing the family of Stompanato, bringing Cheryl in, bringing Lana in, and getting their stories again. Well, now their stories aren't adding up. Lana, could remember her lines for a certain period of time. She couldn't remember it months later. So the attorney in that case said, okay, I got her. I think, once we make sure that she is responsible civilly for Johnny Stampanato's murder, then we can open up the files for the criminal case. So what does Lana do? She settles before it goes to trial. Because why take that risk?
My question was about the screenplay. It's clearly simmering alongside in your head.
Yeah, well, I mean, Terrence Winter, as I said, I'm a pretty good book writer, but Terry's I think, a master at screenwriting, and he was always fascinated by Mickey Cohen, but really didn't know how to crack Mickey's story. And by me blending Mickey's story with Lana's story, I think really kind of triggered, his creative juices and got them going. So we're going back on, what's part of the story do you tell in a feature film? You can't tell it all. So what time period are you really going to have to focus on? And it's got to be the time period in the mid-50s leading up to Johnny Stampanato's killing on Good Friday, 1958.
Can't wait for it.
Me too.
What's amazing to me about this story, I think I remember reading that Cheryl was completely eliminated from Lana's will. Is that a rumor? Or
Yeah, no, that actually happened.
So why didn't, let me just finish for a sec. Why didn't Cheryl just give her mother up? They're estranged. Why didn't she?
Yeah.
Why is I guess it's somewhat astonishing that the major player in this book is living and among us.
Right,
she's
right,
here.
exactly.
And why is she not saying the truth?
Because I think she was the adult in the room.
But now years later.
But years later, and again, she had already written a book claiming responsibility. She'd already, taken that responsibility on her own. So why change history and pin it on your mother? I think Cheryl always mothered Lana, even years after Lana's death. And as I said, they had a really weird relationship.
Yeah.
Cheryl had run away from home several times after. As you can imagine, this was a traumatic moment, and not one, one of many that Cheryl had growing up the daughter of Lana Turner. So I never got to ask Cheryl that question. I wish I did, but I do feel like all of us, hopefully many of us in our room, will do anything for our parents. I'm a mama's boy. I would do the same thing for my mother if I had the opportunity or had to do that.
And just as a segue to that, Cheryl suffered pedophilia abuse at the hands of some of Lana's partners. So yeah, it's like, Casey, you make a really good point. It's such a complicated, such a troubled story.
A lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack for everybody involved. Really.
And Cheryl was gay, which was not accepted by Lana and Lana's mother Mildred, who was, Cheryl would always have these books in her room about, young female teenage relationships. Yeah. And Mildred would, confiscate them and destroy them. And Cheryl could be who she wanted to be, as a teenager. And I think she finally came into her own. From what I've read about Cheryl, is that she had a beautiful relationship with her partner, and I think they live in Palm Springs, California, at last writing anyway. So I hope Cheryl has found some peace and some happiness in her life, and I think she has.
I know somebody in Palm Springs who might be able to introduce you to Cheryl. We'll talk about that.
I'm going to scare the poor lady. Everything happens for a reason. There's always a time and a place for everything. So.
Which, by the way, go look up photos of Cheryl. She was quite beautiful herself. Gorgeous.
Cheryl was very attractive, and and I think she's she became a very prominent and successful person in her own right, out of Lana's shadow.
Excellent. So what's next for Casey Sherman?
Casey Sherman's got a book coming out in April 2025. It's about the notorious Nathan Carman case. Nathan was a young man on the spectrum who was charged with the murder of his mother on the high seas. He had taken his mother out on a deep sea fishing trip off the coast of Rhode Island in 2016. The boat goes down, she disappears. He is a castaway in a life raft for 7 days until he's rescued. And at first, authorities think it's a bittersweet story, and then they begin to question his story because he was drifting in the wrong direction, that he should have been drifting at the time. They also realize that he's the prime suspect in his grandfather's shotgun murder 3 years prior, all to seize control of a $50 million family fortune. It makes the Murdaugh case look like a bunch of amateurs. But I will leave you with this as a teaser. He may be innocent. So just wait until the book comes out. Debate it amongst yourselves. I'll come back and we'll have another conversation about it. And I just signed to write now I think my 19th or 20th book, I can't remember, about Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh,
and
that's
murder that happened.
The burning?
The Taliesin. Frank Lloyd Wright's mistress was killed with an axe, and several of his draftsmen and her children at a home that he had built for her. And it changed his whole career and his whole style of architecture.
Isn't that what the house was set on fire?
The house was set on fire in Wisconsin.
It's a horrible story.
Horrible story, but there's also a beautiful story in it between the relationship between Frank Lloyd Wright and his, I don't even want to use the word mistress, his soulmate. Let's call her that. Incredibly accomplished woman. She was married, he was married. In an Edwardian society, divorce was frowned upon. Frank and Mamie Borthwick was her name. They didn't care. They needed to be together, and they were. And it created a huge scandal in the early 1910s. It was written about like, Prince Harry and Meghan are written about today. And they bucked the trend, and I thought there was some real, courage in making that decision. And ultimately, it ended very tragically.
It's always amazing to me, all these stories that we take for granted.
Yeah, right.
We just don't know.
It keeps us going, Furman. People, you've got a great play you were telling me about yesterday. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, thanks for the plug.
Sure.
Always. We were comparing notes because I've written a play that's going to run at the Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater from September 14th to October 6th. and it's titled Liberty Talks, and the conceit is that the Statue of Liberty has come to life, and she's talking about a lot of different things. She's very distraught. She's on pills and all. You know, she's America. But I mean, if I ask any of you, well, let's try it. How did she end up in the United States? What was the Statue of Liberty?
She was a gift.
France.
A gift from France. Wrong. She was a gift. So she was a gift. She was crowdfunded by a bunch of left-wing abolitionists in France, who then decided to talk to the U.S. government into accepting her. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow.
But one of the little footnotes in there is the story of coffee. Coffee was discovered by a sheep herder who saw the sheep eating beans off of a bush, and he decided to brew them, the beans, not the sheep. He brewed the beans, and voila, he saw that the sheep were all getting jittery after eating the beans, so he made coffee. I mean, all these stories of things that are right before us every day, and we just don't know, and they're fascinating.
And oftentimes in my books, I'll deviate and go down those rabbit holes. If I find something that I'm really fascinated about, how do I get this in the book? It doesn't have to be a whole chapter, but with Helltown, if anybody's read it, there's a chapter about Chappaquiddick, because Edward Denise, who was the DA at the time, was literally, he had Ted on one side and he had Tony Coster on the other. And I got the grand jury notes from Chappaquiddick, and I thought I knew the story. I didn't know the story. I'm like, this can't be a paragraph. This is going to be a whole chapter focused on the tragic death of Mary Jo Kopechne and how young women were discarded and not cared about from your power players in Washington and at the State House in Massachusetts, and very sadistic serial killers as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Well, we're going to have, thank you. We're going to have,
What an honor to be in your company.
we're going to have signed copies of the book available, because Casey will sign remaining stock. And I do want to thank you again, both of you, for being here, and Casey, really for you, really bringing to light a side of Lana Turner that most of us didn't know, and including the fact that I think you said in the book at one point she was the highest paid, among the highest paid actors ever.
Highest,
And then of course it went back to the pay equity in women, not me. But I had no idea, so that was one of the many, many facts. So the book is, you heard a lot tonight, but there's so much more in this book, and it's just one of those books that, whether you're reading the print copy or listening to the audiobook, you can't stop because you don't want to stop. It's that good. I mean, all of his books are good, but this book was fantastic, Casey. So congratulations.
Thank you. Wait till you read about Lana's influence on Evita Peron.
Oh, yes. Perot. Yes, Evita. Wanted to be Lana.
Well, thank you. Thank you.